The bright side of addiction is recovery. If you're in recovery, or you know someone or love someone who is in recovery, or maybe you simply want to know more about the recovery process, maybe you're concerned about your drinking or the drinking or using of someone you know or love, well, this is the podcast for you. You can find all of our podcasts, by the way, at recoverycoasttocoast.org. In this edition, we're going to chat with the president and CEO of one of the West Coast's leading treatment programs, Serenity Lane in Eugene, Oregon. We'll catch up with Pete Kerns and find out why they have been so successful for 50 years running. Then a fascinating conversation with a man who has been sober 29 years, following a very unthinkable event that changed his life forever for the good. And we'll close out the podcast with some inspiring reflections about fear and courage from award-winning actress Aly Mcgraw. Recovery is as recovery does. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, and our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. That's recoverycoasttocoast.org. You'll find all of our podcasts located there. Following 15 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, we've now upgraded to a national podcast available to anyone at any time, featuring interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities, and newsmakers who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy it and to share it with your friends as well because, well, recovery is an American way of life. A reminder, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. We'd love to hear from you. Recovery Coast to Coast is proudly presented by Sundown M Ranch. Now, I have a number of friends who are members of Sundown's alumni. Well, what that means is they have successfully completed treatment and have continued on their path of long-term recovery. You see, at Sundown, their alumni program is second to none. And they're concerned about your future as well as your present. They don't just treat and release. They become partners in your recovery journey. Sundown M Ranch has been around for the past 54 years, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families. They are a not-for-profit organization, and they own their own land at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon in central Washington, just outside of Seattle. It's a breathtaking setting. You can see photos on their website, sundown.org. But, you know, there are a lot of treatment centers in this country that have beautiful facilities and gorgeous campuses and swimming pools and the like. The truth is, it's not how a treatment center looks. It's what a treatment center does. And most importantly, it's the staff that makes all the difference. At Sundown, their staff of highly trained and highly qualified treatment professionals are exceptional. Many of them have been there a long time, and a good number of them actually went through Sundown. If you know someone who's in need of treatment for addiction, or just want to find out more about their program, give them a call. It's completely confidential. They'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have and help you with the admissions process as well. Their toll-free number, 1-800-326-7444. Their website is pretty easy to remember, sundown.org. Recovery M Ranch, where recovery becomes reality. Let's head down to San Diego, where we caught up with the former police chief of Eugene, Oregon, who found his dream following in his father's footsteps. His dad founded one of the oldest treatment programs on the West Coast. Let's meet Pete Kerns. We welcome you back to Recovery Coast to Coast, America's voice for recovery. We are on the road down here in San Diego for the big leadership conference put on by the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. This is their 43rd annual conference, and we're just delighted to be down here, and you meet a lot of new friends, old friends, people from all around the country, and run into people basically just down the street, down I-5 into Eugene, and Serenity Lane. Pete Kerns is the president and CEO of Serenity Lane. I've known about them for years. I had a very good friend who was involved with them, and I've actually sent a number of patients to Serenity Lane over the years. And Pete is nice enough to stop by and talk a little bit about the program. How long has it been around? Your dad was a founder, right?
Yeah, my dad was one of the founders in 1973. So we're just had our 49th birthday, and we're diving into our 50th year, and looking forward to our 50th celebration.
What are you doing for the 50th, Pete?
Well, that's still in the planning, but we have a number of events scheduled for the year, and that will culminate in a celebration on the last day.
Wow. You know, people often ask me, how do you, quote unquote, shop for a treatment center? Which is kind of bizarre, because it's the only health condition I know of where people shop for treatment.
Mm-hmm.
If you had cancer, you wouldn't call around and say, well, what is your success rate, and how much does it cost, and all of these things that people do when it comes to addiction treatment. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I tell people is, number one, stick with the old timers, the programs that have been around for a long time. There's a lot of bad actors right now in this field, and a lot of them are fairly new in the last few years. They're in it for the money. They treat and release, and they're on to the next patient. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate. So I tell people, number one, find a program that's been around for a long time, an established program. Number two, find a program that has a staff that's been together for a while. And number three, be sure they're members of NAATP for a lot of reasons, but especially because of the code of ethics that all of the members have to abide by. Again, in this field, all the advertising, all the programs look great. They look splashy. They've got swimming pools. They've got saunas. They've got big screen TVs in the room, and all of these things. That's not treatment. A treatment is totally different. So you folks have been around 50 years. What are some of the changes that you have seen, Pete?
Well, I've got sort of a different way of coming into the treatment field myself. As I said earlier, our dad, together with a man named Sam Graves, started Serenity Lane in 1973, and they went through all the rigors of a new company, a new nonprofit.
Why did they start it?
Pardon me?
Why?
That's a long story, but it's a good one. Our dad was orphaned when he was just a little kid. He lived in a small town in Nebraska, and the last of his family to die was his dad, who was an alcoholic. He was a dentist, only dentist in this small town, and he loved and adored his dad, but it was extremely upsetting to him to see him struggle with his alcoholism.
Sure. Was this in Eugene?
This was in Scotts Bluff, Nebraska.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
His father died from his alcoholism, and it affected him for the rest of his life. It drove how he approached his medical practice after World War II, and the expansion of a number of innovations that he initiated as a physician in Eugene. And then in the early 70s, he researched how treatment could be done well throughout the United States, found Sam Graves running a place in North Dakota, and invited him to come to Eugene and help him start Serenity Lane, which was just a huge risk for Sam and his family, but he was moved by the compassion and the motivation of our dad. So they came out and started it.
Why Eugene?
Well, he, a shipmate on the destroyer in which he served in South Pacific, suggested that he move to, that he set up his family in Grants Pass, Oregon, because it's such a beautiful place. They were there for some time when he realized it wasn't quite a large enough community for him to do the things he had planned or he'd hoped to accomplish in his medical career. So they moved to Eugene. They didn't want to live in a big city like Portland, and ended up there.
Nice. What makes Serenity Lane unique?
You said it a little bit in your introduction. We've been around a long time. It started with the devotion of a couple of gentlemen who loved the alcoholic and would do what was necessary in order to help them get into recovery. The legacy of those two has been honored throughout Serenity Lane. I spent my career in law enforcement. I was the police chief in Eugene for the 10 years just before I retired in late 2017, early 2018. I'm sure my dad would never have imagined that I would have gotten into this field, but but I knew that.
But he'd be damn proud.
I would like to think so, but in public safety, you retire early. I wasn't 60 years old, had a lot of leadership and executive experience, and I wanted to be able to share it somehow. And there were a few nonprofits in Lane County in which I would have been happy to serve. The executive director of Lane County was retiring just about the time that I had retired, so I asked the board if they'd be interested in my taking over as CEO, and they very graciously allowed that.
What have you learned?
Oh my gosh. I learned what I've known academically, but seeing it firsthand is so much more powerful. I've learned that addiction is a disease of the brain. It overrides our conscious decision-making process. Addiction masquerades as a character flaw when it isn't. It's a disease of the brain that affects our decision-making. That's the most prominent thing, and the other prominent thing I've seen is what remarkable people you see who are in recovery. People who achieve sobriety and then sustain their recovery by day upon day upon day of extraordinary effort, looking at themselves, their flaws, their imperfections, and doing their best to become the very best version of themselves they can be, produces some amazing individuals.
Tell me about the treatment modality at Serenity Lane and how it works. We throw around all the time, well, he went into treatment. Well, what the hell does that mean? Do you stick your finger in a light socket? Are you put in a cell somewhere? People don't know. We use that term in a cavalier way. Well, we went into treatment like everybody knows. What happens when people go into treatment at Serenity Lane?
Sure. And it's scary to go into treatment because of the stigma.
Sure.
The social stigma that's tied to it. People are afraid to admit, even to themselves, that they've got a significant problem that needs to be addressed. And
denial is pretty powerful.
Yeah, very. And not just by the person who suffers from the addiction, but also their family.
Absolutely.
So those fears are what precede a person's entry into a place like Serenity Lane. When people enter the gate, they're just shocked to see what, the facility that they've come to. It looks sort of like a Central Oregon resort type of place, and we're fortunate that it was just we just completed and we moved into it a few years ago. But we have a program that's not unlike a lot of places. We have a hospital unit where people's withdrawal is managed, and we have a long-term residential program where people dig into in a group setting and a variety of evidence-based programmatic primary groups. People dig into the conditions of their brain and also their social patterns and family patterns that are contributing to their addiction. They come out armed with tools to better manage their life and continue in their recovery process. We have outpatient facilities throughout Oregon that most patients transfer to and so on. So our treatment includes that medical withdrawal and ongoing medication-assisted therapy and mental health care. We have a mental health department and then a team of counseling clinicians that care for people.
How many beds at Serenity Lane?
There's about 90 beds.
Co-ed?
Yep, it's co-ed.
Yeah.
And a person's introduction to the facility is they have a nice, very welcoming phone conversation when they're screened to see if we're the right place for them to go to. And then they drive up. They're greeted in their car by an admissions counselor, and most people are astonished at the warm and non-judgmental welcoming that they have. And again, I'm sure this is true everywhere. They're guided.
You treat people with dignity.
We treat them with respect and dignity and love and empathy.
Yeah.
Many of our staff are in recovery themselves and know exactly what people are experiencing as they come in.
Yeah. You mentioned that phone call to see if they were the right fit for Serenity Lane. What if they're not?
Yeah, we're lucky to have a team of outreach managers who have strong relationships with all the other respected treatment facilities throughout the Pacific Northwest and California and other states. So people do have unique needs sometimes in their addiction. They could have an associated eating disorder or some other behavioral health condition. Treating two things like that together aren't always, sometimes require a specialized facility. And so we'll help with that.
And of course, one of the big barriers to treatment is finances. Obviously, you take major insurance.
Yeah.
But what about the person who doesn't have the money and needs the help?
Yeah, there is sort of a vapor of of people, a demographic that is neither in Medicaid nor covered by commercial insurance, and we can help with that. We do have a scholarship program, and we can support people if their insurance doesn't quite cover it. There's long-term payment plans that we can set people up with.
Sure.
The most important thing, though, is that people don't fear the finances. They get into treatment. Hopefully it's with a respected organization that will respect their financial situation and help them work through those expenses.
Tell me about your alumni program. Obviously, if you've been around 49, 50 years, you got a lot of folks that are family.
Yeah, we've treated about 65,000 people, probably something more than that in the years during our service. And we do have a strong alumni program. We keep our alumni informed of what's going on. We bring them together for picnics and barbecues occasionally. We know that alumni are going to know people who need treatment.
Sure.
And so they're a great resource for all those people in communities who need care but are afraid to reach out for it.
What is your website?
We have a website that's advertised on Google.
It's serenitylane.org.
Yes.
So
thanks.
if people want to find out more about Serenity Lane,
thanks.
they would go to
serenitylane.org.
And you probably take people from all over the country, I would imagine.
We do actually.
You've got a good, solid reputation.
Yeah, thank you. That's nice of you to say. We do have a good reputation, and it's founded on the legacy of the two men who got the place started.
Yeah.
And I'm just so impressed that so many leaders over the years have honored that legacy, and it has ensured the quality of service and care that we provide still today.
What do you see for the next 2-3 years for Serenity Lane once you pass 50? Do you have big plans? Any expansion or?
Yeah, we are going to expand our efforts in the Portland area. You've probably seen the numbers in the average number of people who die from overdose deaths right now is at about 100,000. It's over 100,000.
Yeah.
75 to 80% of those are dying actually from fentanyl
Yep.
overdoses. So the need is huge. And so the more that we can provide a service and expand our efforts in outpatient, the better off I think our communities will be. So that'll be the biggest push for us in the next few years.
You're doing a terrific job, and your dad would be proud.
That's very kind of you.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Pete Kerns for joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast. And again, you can find out more about Serenity Lane at serenitylane.org. Now, coming up next, we're going to turn our attention to Matt. He is a grateful person in long-term recovery who for years was a dealer and a taker, but now he's a giver and a helper. This conversation was recorded down in San Diego. Welcome back once again to Recovery Coast to Coast, America's Voice for Recovery. Great to have you with us. We're down here in San Diego. Lovely city, great conference. It's the NAATP National Leadership Conference for 2022. And NAATP is the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. Some of the top people in the field, in the country, all here in San Diego. One of them is a guy by the name of Matt Yunker. And I met Matt, I guess it was the first night, and sat at the table and we talked, and he was not going to be here the second day, and here it is the third day, and he says, I promise I'll come back on the third day and I'll sit down and we'll talk. So, Matt, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
Thank you.
Tell me about Matt. How long have you been in recovery, my friend?
I've been sober 29 years.
Oh, a newcomer.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Oh, my goodness. Where did you get sober?
I got sober in Southern California, out in Fullerton.
Fullerton, Orange County.
Orange County.
My goodness. And what brought you into recovery? The police, the judge, the family.
Essentially, I grew up in alcoholism. My stepfather got sober. He's about 34 years sober now. I grew up in and around the rooms, and eventually decided to take it on myself, and then tried everything I could do to stop, and finally came straight into AA.
What kind of trouble did you get into?
I was a terrible driver, and I had quite a few car accidents. I, selling drugs.
So you were an entrepreneur as well as...
Early on, I got an early start.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
One of the major thing that brought me in was I had sold to a kid, and she had committed suicide.
Oh.
And then there's only so much you can do to try to wash away the shame and guilt. And eventually I couldn't.
You can't.
Yeah. And a guy in AA reached out and brought me in and said, hey, why don't you come to a meeting? And
You were ready.
I was ready. Well, I was almost ready. I was on a Thursday. Saturday, I got loaded, and then the next Sunday, I was ready.
Yeah, there you go.
I had one last hurrah.
Yeah. And that was 29 years ago.
29 years ago, March 13th of 93.
What is recovery like for Matt today?
In terms of what do I do to stay sober? What do I do to...
All of that.
My program really revolves around a 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous. I go to 3 to 4 meetings a week. I sponsor between 5 and 9 guys, depending on who's calling me at the time. I have a sponsor. I talk to him pretty much daily or 3 or 4 times a week.
Have you always had a sponsor?
No, there was a time between about 15 and 17 I didn't. I thought that I could be accountable to folks in AA without being accountable to one individual, and that really didn't work out so well. I didn't get loaded, but my meetings dropped to about 1 a week, and maybe 1 every 2 weeks, and my wife got a little sketched.
Kind of a red flag?
Yeah, she was like looking at me sideways across the house. And,
Yeah.
Eventually, what had happened then was I traveled a lot for work, and I was in San Diego at the time, and I ran into a guy that was a peer. And he said, hey, who's your sponsor? And I said, oh, well, I'm accountable to all these guys that I talk to regularly. And he's like, oh, really? Okay. And then I was up in Orange County on the same day, probably about 4 hours later, and a buddy of mine, another peer with 20 years or so, he says, so, hey, who's your sponsor? And I was like, I'm around. I talk to guys. I go to a meeting here and there. And he's like, oh, maybe you should look into that. And then so I walked into a men's stag that Wednesday night. It was on a Wednesday. And another guy, I was walking up, and he says, hey, Matt, who's your sponsor? And I was like, okay, I got it. 3 counties, 3 different guys.
Hello, knock. Matt, are you home?
Yeah, God was sending a message. So
Yeah.
I said, I better get another sponsor.
Yeah.
And so I did, and still sober.
Yeah, it's
Working.
I've done a lot of interviews with people who have gone out after a long period of sobriety because they stopped going to meetings. They stopped doing the things that they needed to do that got them where they were. And it's kind of like, well, that was then, this is now. And I remember one guy coming in when we first started the radio show about 15 years ago. And he was all smiles, and he said, boy, I just came from a meeting. And he said, it just spoke to me. There was a guy who had 25 years of sobriety, and he went out and got drunk. And he says, man, that was the best thing in the world. And I thought,
Drive him right back into AA.
why, you sick bastard. And he said, this is a selfish program. And I need to know that even at 25 years, I could go out and get drunk again.
We like to talk about, like, don't let the life that AA gave you get in the way of your AA way of life. Right? AA is, and sobriety's given me this amazing life where, I was able to go back to school.
Right.
I got married. I have a beautiful kid, a great family. I have relationships with my siblings and my parents, and have a career, a business, and all of those things can easily get in front of Alcoholics Anonymous or my sobriety.
Right.
Whatever I put in front of my sobriety is going to, be the first to go
right.
if I lose it. And so I was taught early on that, don't get sidetracked. Don't get it twisted. It's real easy you're only an arm's length away from picking up a drink.
Absolutely. And I had some buttons that I did at a conference one time that I distributed called Recovery First. Because if you don't put recovery first, everything else is going to go to shit.
Basically.
Yeah. It may take a little bit of time, but it will go down. It will go down the tubes. What do you say to people? Because you've been around a long time and you sponsor people. What do you say to people who say, I've tried AA and it doesn't work for me. I've been, in and out, and I just can't get it.
Usually I say you didn't really try AA. You came to AA, and you didn't try it.
That's right. Difference between going to meetings and working the program.
Right. There's a line in the book. This is a new way of life.
Right.
This isn't a program. So we're at the treatment We're at the NAATP, right? This
Right.
is all treatment providers. These are programs.
Right.
You come into the program, you leave the program. Sobriety is a way of life.
Right.
This is something that you embrace as there is no.
But if it's a good program, we're talking about the treatment programs now. If it's a good program, when you leave that program, you cross over that bridge into continuing care because.
Absolutely.
You know, after 29 days, you're not sober.
No.
I mean,
there's
maybe
a big there's
yeah.
a difference between abstinence and sobriety.
Absolutely. And you're given the tools by these treatment centers. They give you a big box of tools.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use the tools, you're going to be fine. But if you don't use the tools, it's well, you know, I don't need that one, I don't need that one, and I've got my own.
They pick
program.
and choose.
Absolutely. Then you're looking for trouble. But if you follow the path, you stick with the winners, and you do the things that you're supposed to do one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, whatever the hell it takes.
It works.
It works. It works. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. And you know, Friday night they were talking about the data, right? And they were running through the success rates and the data that applies to those that are the untangible is who's doing it as opposed to who's not doing it, right? The success story is of those that do it.
Right.
So of those that do the work, what's the percentage of recovery?
Right.
Those that don't do the work, it's not a surprise when they go back out.
Yeah.
And hopefully they make it back. You know, that's the.
But when you get into recovery, there's still shit that happens. How do you deal with stuff that happens today, where while you were drinking and using, obviously you had a path out by escaping. How do you handle those things in your recovery today when shit happens?
So things always happen, right? Again, it goes back to the tools, and it goes back to the, I would say, the support structure that you have built around you. So in AA, we talk about a fellowship growing up about you, and that's usually your sponsor and the sponsorship line that you build, and that's your fellowship.
Yeah.
And when things come up, or when things do happen, because they will, that is what holds you up when you can't, right? A power greater than ourselves, the Creator, God, whatever you call that, is going to be there. If you've gone through the steps and you found a power greater than yourself, then that power outside of us, because there are times when there is no mental defense. But if we have a support structure along with a God, you can make it through it.
Yeah.
And I'd say the other key piece is the willingness to be completely vulnerable and accountable to other people.
Yeah.
Because when things happen, when things happen and the shit hits the fan, and you are standing there and you are there. When I got sober at 18, there's a lot of things that didn't happen up until 18.
Yeah.
But at 28, there's a whole nother list of problems, right? I was never married. And fortunately, I'm still married. But there are times where she was like, well, you need to get out, right?
Yeah.
And so when you come rolling into AA and you're like, here I am with all of my character defects, the willingness to identify those things and change and be accountable to somebody else and to recognize that, it's, just because I'm sober doesn't mean I'm perfect.
Yeah.
And the guy who shares at 25 that went out and drank, I prefer to listen to those guys who share at 25 and have life problems and share those life problems so that you know that at 25 you can still have life problems.
Yeah.
At 29 I still have life problems. At 40 people have life problems. As long as we're willing to keep working on those and keep changing and keep growing, then you can make it.
It's not what happens to you. It's what you do when things happen.
Absolutely.
What about balance in recovery? I had a friend a couple of years ago that got divorced because of AA. I mean, he went overboard. He was going like 2 or 3 meetings a day, 7 days a week. He was sponsoring people.
So you can hide in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh yeah, you can overdo it. Absolutely,
you can. And I used to think that early in my recovery, I used to think that there is a balance, and on one side of the scale is AA, and on the other side of the scale is everything else. Because if I don't have recovery first, everything else fails.
Right.
But what I believe today is that the balance is not in the amount of meetings I'm doing or the amount of guys I'm working with. It's what I'm doing for my own recovery and what I'm doing to help others, right? So I still go to meetings, and this is what I need to do, right? I need to go to meetings. I need to be accountable. I talk to a sponsor. I talk to the guys I sponsor. There are times where the guys I sponsor are like, hey, Matt, you are way manic right now. You need to bring it back.
Dial it back.
You need to bring that back.
Yeah.
Dial it back. And I'm like, what? I'm fine. They're like, no, you're not. Let's go. We need to go. Let's go for a walk. Yeah. And so this is the fellowship that grew up about me, right? The balance is in that I've found that I need to balance, and I think it goes to step 11, right? Seeking to enlarge that spiritual way of life, where my sponsor talks a lot about the emotional sobriety and the dependencies, and I can be dependent on AA as much as anything else. And if I still have these dependencies, as opposed to dependency on God or the dependency on a creator or my higher power, then I have no balance. So I need to understand what those dependencies are and then work on those individually. So it takes time.
And keep your eye on the ball.
And absolutely, sobriety has got to be first.
Yeah, absolutely. You're here at NAATP. You have a consulting company. What are you doing professionally?
So these days I do have a consulting company. I work with detox residential facilities, help them stand up in the operations, business development, and operational efficiencies. I help them navigate the tough road to opening a detox. There's a big gap between the business side of things and the clinical side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's got to be very rewarding for you as an individual in recovery.
Well, for years I tried to stay out of the treatment industry. I stayed in a corporate America, and I went back to school and got a degree, and I rode that for so long. And,
what did you do?
Sales mostly across from logistics, IT, security, a lot of cloud-based stuff. So a lot of just selling stuff, right? And what I came to is that we could pick up and sell another widget or another service at any time. And what I found is I wanted to spend more time with my family. I wanted to be able to travel more. I wanted the freedom to, we're talking about that balance.
Yeah.
Right? The balance, the work-life balance. And a few folks in recovery that had some treatment centers hit me up and said, hey, I know you've done some startups. You've worked with a lot in the business. Can you help us on our business? And so it's been working out. It works out really well. And
had you been to an NAATP conference before?
This is my first one.
What do you think?
I like it.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with the amount of long-term sobriety that is in and around the conference, and in addition to how do I say it, the contribution to the recovery industry.
Yeah,
where it's big, and the more people that we can reach out to, the more help that they can get.
Absolutely.
So.
And the thing that I like best about NAATP is their code of ethics, because right now there's a lot of bad actors getting into this field with splashy advertising, and it's treat and release, and it's fill the next bed and make a buck and then be gone. And you're dealing with people's lives, damn it.
Well, yeah. That's what it comes down to.
And people are so vulnerable that need treatment, and they don't know where to go, and they see a flashy thing on their phone, and it's got a swimming pool, and it's got this, and it's got that, and come here, and there's no substance.
There's no depth and weight.
No depth, no. So it's very important that you search for a treatment center and you do your homework. You find a program that's got some history to it, that where the staff has been together for a while, that has a good code of ethics, and members of NAATP. I think it's very, very important.
That's what I'm seeing.
Yep.
That's why I said I'm really pretty impressed with the conference and the folks that are here.
Well, I'm glad that you came back on Monday for the final day and sat down and had a little chat. I've been looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me.
Matt Yunker, and if you want to find out more about his consulting, it's myconsultinggroup.com. Not your consulting group, but myconsultinggroup.com. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks to Matt. If you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path you've chosen, and as long as you have been in continuous recovery for a year or more, please drop us a note, recoverycoasttocoast.net. Now, in just 30 seconds, we're going to hear from one of America's great actresses, Aly Mcgraw, who celebrates her recovery every single day. Stay with us.
Are you afraid? Afraid of life without drugs and alcohol? There is help and hope at Sundown M Ranch. At Sundown, the focus is on you and your disease. You will learn how to live without depending on drugs and alcohol. Sundown M Ranch is nationally recognized for effective and affordable alcohol and drug treatment programs. Reclaim your life. Replace your fears with hope. Go to www.sundown.org right now to learn more.
And now, as promised, a thought for the day from a person in long-term recovery, actress Aly Mcgraw, reflecting on fear and letting go.
When we realize it's necessary to let something go, yet are unable to do so, fear is what usually keeps us from loosening our grip. Never was that more apparent than when we were beginning our new life. It had already become clear that we would be well advised to let go of many of the things that had sustained us in our old life. An image bound up with material pursuits and possessions. Character defects that were still working for us. Dependencies on people, things, and substances. But we couldn't let go completely because we feared what might happen to us. We were afraid we would lose our identity, that we'd become boring, people wouldn't like us. We were afraid of taking risks, meeting new people, trying and perhaps failing. We were afraid of change and the unknown. Over time, a day at a time, we were able to put fear behind us. What made it possible was the growing realization that we weren't just letting things go and leaving empty spaces. We were replacing self-centered pursuits with spiritual goals, pride with humility, and fear with faith. Thought for today. When I let go of the old, I make room for the new.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the National Podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we would love to hear from you. Our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Let us know where you listen from. And also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And let us know what you like and what you don't like. That really helps us to help carry the message, especially on social media. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals available as well. 1-800-622-HELP, 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for well over 50 years. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, to live in gratitude, and, of course, to be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.